Hi folks, today I wanted to talk just a little bit about behavior and what are called the ABCs of behavior. So this is one way of thinking about behaviors. It's helpful sometimes to use this model of thinking when you're dealing with a child who has special needs or who has sensory issues. Folks who have sensory processing issues, you can sometimes tease out what's going on a little bit better with this model than using other frameworks. So that's why I'm going to talk about it today. So the A in the ABCs of behavior is antecedent. And that's a big fancy word that just means what happened before the behavior. So say your child walked over and you'd been doing bubbles for a while, playing together, and all of a sudden your child walks over and dumps over the jar of bubble stuff. So what you want to do is think about the behavior that you saw that's not desirable, which would be dumping over the bubble stuff, and think about what were some of the small things that you saw before that happened. So had you been doing that activity with your child for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and maybe they were already getting tired of it? Were they trying to communicate with you in some way? Had they walked away from the activity several times? Or were they wiggling in the chair and acted like they were not interested in it anymore? Were they trying to communicate with you that they were done? Because sometimes kids who have poor communication skills, they'll do a behavior instead of being able to communicate. So the behavior itself, it's pretty self-explanatory, so that's what you have concerns about. And then the consequence means, how did you respond? So sometimes we respond to things and we don't even think about it. So for instance, if a child knocked over the bubble stuff, what was your first gut reaction? Usually it's probably something like, oh no, how did that happen? And you might have exaggerated facial expressions. You might have a lot of vocal tone to your voice that in regular speech you don't have. And sometimes kids who have sensory difficulties, they're seeking that difference in the sensations. It's not that they were trying to frustrate you or they weren't trying to misbehave or do something that they've been told not to. Maybe they don't have the communication skills to explain things in that way. So oftentimes our vocal quality can be very reinforcing of things that we don't want to see happen every day. And so that's something to be aware of. Another type of consequence to the behavior can be that we keep a very calm tone, a very flat facial expression, and that's not natural for a lot of people. We kind of have to work at that and train ourselves to do that. But if it's a sensory seeking type of behavior, then often just keeping a very calm tone, almost ignoring the situation. So you might, quickly pick up the spilled bubbles, clean up without saying anything, try to not have a lot of facial expression that would show frustration. And then what you're going to do is maybe continue the activity briefly with but with a change so that that can't happen again. Because often a child will want to repeat their behavior to see if you repeat your reaction. And it's not really that they're trying to misbehave as much as it is that they're trying to get a difference in the sensations that are around them. So some of the examples I'm going to talk about are for antecedents. Sorry about my video quality here. So some of the things you could see before a child does a behavior, we'll use another example and we'll kind of switch back and forth between some examples. Maybe I'm working on handwriting with a student, and that child, I notice they start looking around the room and maybe wiggling in their seat. Maybe they have a hard time staying in their seat all of a sudden. They might be having difficulty communicating with me that they're done. They're tired of that activity. Maybe the activity is too hard or too difficult. That's often also when we see some of those activities. So the behavior that we might see for a handwriting activity would be if the child got out of their seat, maybe they push the activity away. Or maybe they do something like take their pencil and break it in half. So regardless, they're communicating that they don't want to do that activity, they're done with that activity. And sometimes by doing something more out of the ordinary, like breaking the pencil, sometimes that is more of a sensory seeking behavior where they are trying to get the activity to stop, but they also want to see a reaction because they've done that once before and somebody had a great reaction to it. So for instance, if I had a child break a pencil in half, what I would do is look away, not say anything, keep a very flat expression on my face. And then what that does is that is a way of extinction. So by not giving them a big, huge reaction, emotional reaction, they will be less likely to do that behavior again. And that is one of the evidence-based practices that works really well for kids who have differences in sensory processing. And if you're interested, let me know. I can get you handouts on extinction and how to use that with children. So let me see. The other thing about extinction is you're going to want to resume the activity, but do it in a way there's a change. So if I have a child break the activity, break the pencil in half, we might say, well, let's finish one thing, then we'll be done. I think you're telling me you're ready to be all done. Let's finish, then we're all done. So I would give them a small pencil or part of the broken pencil, and we would want to make some type of mark on that paper, and then you can give them what they were seeking, which is a big sensory reaction, and you can say, great job, good job, oh, I'm so proud of you, and give them lots of vocal inflection and lots of positive change in your facial expression, really big expression and smiling. And those things can then be positively reinforcing that they came back and finished, even though it's not exactly what you wanted done. But they came back and participated, and that's the important thing that you want to teach. So the other thing is, maybe the task was too hard, they were actually frustration, and maybe the task needs to be made easier. So just doing one part, the very last part of that task. Maybe you draw the A and then have them put their pencil on the paper for the very last thing. Good job, you put your pencil on the paper. Okay, now we're going to change what we're going to do. Let's do something different. Great job. So proud of you. So trying to encourage partial participation there at the end. That's kind of what I've gotten written down there. Can be very reinforcing. So you don't encourage work avoidance behaviors because sometimes children will do a negative behavior because they're trying to communicate that they're done. So in looking back, if a child is avoiding a certain task, Maybe it's just too difficult and you need to back the task back a little bit. Maybe instead of writing the letter independently, maybe they need to trace it for a while longer. Maybe instead of watching you do it, you know, they need to trace and learn in that way where they can be successful and feel positive about themselves. So once again, the antecedent would be what happened first. What were the things that you noticed before that behavior? Maybe there's lots of wiggling around and getting out of their seat. Maybe that's the antecedent for a behavior because they need to leave and use the restroom or something. Maybe they're getting out of the seat is a way of trying to communicate that they need to go to the bathroom. So try and observe closely what happens before a behavior that you don't desire to have happen. And then remember, whatever your response is can sometimes be very reinforcing in ways that you don't intend. So if a child throws their, chalk across the room or something, if you don't really have much response other than walk over and get the chalk and then change the activity so that they can be successful, that's going to reduce that behavior. If you respond by going, "Little Johnny, you shouldn't do that," and he's getting facial expression and all sorts of vocal tone and finger pointing and all of these things, sometimes that can be a sensory reinforcement in a way that we don't expect it. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I appreciate your watching my talk. I'm sorry I'm not the most entertaining presenter, but hopefully you've learned something, and I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.